Alright, let's dive into something that's both fascinating and a bit mind-boggling, the 1960s rock scene. Personally, I think this era was like the Wild West of music. Bands were forming, breaking up, and reforming faster than anyone could keep track. And what's even more intriguing, some of these bands didn't just disappear into obscurity, they launched multiple solo careers. Today, I want to talk about 3 iconic bands from this chaotic, brilliant decade that did exactly that. But here's the twist, I'm not just listing facts. I'm going to unpack why this phenomenon matters, what it says about the era, and why it's still relevant today. Let's get started. First up, Crosby, Stills and Nash. Now, what makes this really interesting is that this wasn't just any band, it was a supergroup. David Crosby from the Byrds, Stephen Stills from Buffalo Springfield, and Graham Nash from the Hollies? That's like assembling the Avengers of folk rock. Their 1969 debut album was a masterpiece of harmonies, with tracks like Wooden Ships that still give me chills. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Neil Young joins the mix, and they become CSNY. In my opinion, this is a perfect example of the 60s collaborative spirit. Artists weren't just competing, they were merging talents. But what's truly remarkable is what happened after the group disbanded. Each member went solo, and here's the kicker, they didn't just fade away. They thrived. This raises a deeper question. Was the supergroup a stepping stone, or was it the peak? Personally, I think it was both. It gave them credibility and a platform, but their solo careers showed they had more to say individually. What many people don't realize is that this pattern, bands launching solo careers, wasn't just common in the 60s, it was almost expected. The era was about exploration, both musically and personally. Now, let's talk about the Beatles. I know, you're probably thinking, the Beatles? Solo careers? Really? But if you take a step back and think about it, their post-breakup trajectories are just as groundbreaking as their time together. John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr, each of them carved out distinct solo paths. What makes this really interesting is how different their solo work was from the Beatles' sound. George Harrison's All Things Must Pass is a spiritual journey. Paul McCartney's Wings was pure pop rock, and John Lennon's solo work was raw and political. From my perspective, this shows the sheer breadth of their talent. They weren't just a band, they were individual artists who happened to come together for a moment in time. What this really suggests is that the Beatles weren't just a product of their era, they were shaping it, even after they split. And let's be honest, their solo careers kept the Beatles' legacy alive in a way that felt fresh and relevant. Finally, let's talk about Led Zeppelin. Now, I know they're often associated with the 70s, but their debut album dropped in 1969, so they're fair game. What immediately stands out is how their sound dominated the decade that followed. But here's the thing, after John Bonham's tragic death in 1980, the band ended, and Robert Plant and Jimmy Page went solo. A detail I find fascinating is how their solo work both honored and diverged from Led Zeppelin's legacy. Robert Plant's solo career, for instance, explored more acoustic and world music influences, while Jimmy Page collaborated with artists like The Firm. In my opinion, this shows the tension between staying true to your roots and evolving as an artist. Led Zeppelin's breakup wasn't just the end of a band, it was the beginning of new artistic chapters. What many people don't realize is that this pattern of reinvention is a hallmark of rock's greatest artists. They don't just stop, they transform. So, what's the bigger picture here? These 3 bands, Crosby, Stills and Nash, the Beatles, and Led Zeppelin, weren't just products of the 60s, they were catalysts for change. The fact that multiple members from each band went solo speaks to the era's emphasis on individual expression. But it also raises a deeper question. Was the 60s rock scene about collaboration or competition? Personally, I think it was both. Artists were pushing each other to innovate, but they were also carving out their own spaces. This duality is what makes the era so captivating. It wasn't just about the music, it was about the journey, the experimentation, and the legacy. As I wrap this up, I'm left with one thought. What if these bands had never broken up? Would their solo careers have still happened? Or would they have stifled each other's creativity? It's a question we'll never know the answer to, but it's worth pondering. What's clear is that the 60s weren't just a decade of music, they were a decade of possibility. And these bands, they didn't just ride the wave, they created it. So, here's my question for you. Which of these solo careers do you think had the biggest impact? Let me know in the comments. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep rocking.